Hello, and welcome to A Sunny Book Nook. Today we are in a different location, and this is the location I'm going to be in for a while, because I've moved to Boston-ish for the time being-ish. So today I wanted to give you a quick little recommendation list of underrated novellas. If you don't know, a novella is basically like a short book, a novel, but smaller. Okay, so the first book I want to recommend, the first novella I want to recommend is Princess Floralinda and the 40-Flight Tower. This book is just so cute and wonderful. It's about a princess who is stuck in a tower, and she basically has to fight her way down because there's 40 levels, and on each level there's like some sort of creature or something that she needs to destroy, because the whole point is that a witch put her up there so that a prince could come save her, but none of the princes are actually doing a good job of saving her, so she has to kind of rescue herself, and she kind of acquires skills as she goes along, slaying, the various creatures in her attempt to escape the tower. And she also has help from a fairy friend. It is a cute, sapphic, beautiful little fairy tale retelling, and it is so charming and funny, and I enjoyed it so much. So that is the first novella I'm going to recommend. The next novella I want to talk about here today is The Emperor's Soul by Brandon Sanderson. Obviously, Brandon Sanderson is a very popular author, so me saying one of his books is underrated in my mind, I guess. It's like I haven't really seen that many other people talk about it. The Emperor's Soul is basically about this prisoner who is captured in this castle, basically in this kingdom that she's not from, and she has to figure out how to create sort of like a code in order to crack the emperor's soul, because the emperor is basically like frozen in his body, and it's a secret. No one in the nation knows it except his closest advisors, and so she has to like bring him back to life with the magical skill that she has. And it is a really intelligently constructed magical world, and it's a really tight novella that can squeeze in a lot of action and thought-provoking elements into it in a really impressive way, I think. So I really like this sci-fi fantasy sort of elevated reality that we get to experience in sort of shortened amount of time because it's a novella. So yeah, this is definitely more approachable for people who like are not that into fantasy but like want to get into it, so I would definitely recommend this book. The next book I want to recommend is, I feel like, not as underrated. I've heard a few people talk about this book, and it is The Murders of Mollybourne by Tade Thompson. This novella is about a girl who, every time she bleeds, every drop of blood that she bleeds becomes a clone of herself, and we have to watch her as she like fights all of these clones of herself, and we follow her from her childhood all the way up to her adulthood. And obviously she grew up in a very interesting way, because she had to be isolated from other kids and learn how to deal with these clones of herself. And she's a really highly intelligent, sort of removed, emotionally shut off type of person who is also like a cold-blooded killer of herself and her clones. Yeah, I thought this book was really interesting as a concept, and I think it delivered on its concept pretty well. So I would definitely recommend this as a novella. The next novella I want to recommend is Over the Woodward Wall by A. Deborah Baker, also known as Seanan McGuire. This is a middle-grade fantasy novel about these two kids who one day basically go through this wall and end up in this world where they have to navigate like the various royalties. Like there's the Queen of Cups and the King of Swords and whatever. It's giving very like tarot card-esque, and like different elements of like the kingdom or the magical land that they've wandered upon have different magic things. It's a really interestingly written book that feels almost fairy tale like, I feel, and it's very much like a quest sort of story. And because it feels like middle grade, although I think any age range could really enjoy this, it is accessible in that way, but it's also fun to get lost in, because on some level it's like really intelligent, and in other ways it's just like a quirky, fun little story for middle grade readers. The next book I want to talk about, I actually have right here. I finished it yesterday, and that is An Unnatural Life by Aaron K. Wagner. This book is set on this planet where it's like in the future, and there is this lawyer named Aya, who's the main character we're following, and she is trying to defend this Robotnik, who is, it's a robot, artificial intelligence, who supposedly murdered this woman, but he says he didn't do it. And so she is trying to get him like a fair trial, basically. Because he's a robot, Aya, as the lawyer's like own prejudices against him, as well as all of the prejudices that humans have against artificial intelligence. And this book I think was really intelligent, and I think it's been compared to like a crossover of the Murderbot series by Martha Wells, which is a really hyped up, well-known series of novellas, which is why I didn't mention it in this video, obviously, because it's, underrated novellas I'm talking about. But it's been compared to the Murderbot series meets like To Kill a Mockingbird, because there's the court element. I think that that's a pretty apt way of describing this. Obviously, because it's a novella and it's like a sci-fi book, the sort of world building is minimal, but in a way that I feel like is good, because you get a sense of what the world is like, but no, you don't really need those detailed sort of explanations, and it just feels like you're immersed in this world of robots and humans in this sort of destitute mining technology immersed facility that is this planet. Because the person that she's defending in court, the person Aya is defending isn't even a person, is a robot. It's like he doesn't really have rights. And so the question of who has rights and what artificial intelligence means for humanity and the legal system, and the way that is explored as a concept, I think it's done very interestingly in this book. So I would recommend this. And I feel like not many people have heard of it. So the next book I want to recommend is Magma by Tora. I cannot pronounce this Icelandic last name, but you can see it on the screen. This book is very, very short, and it is very brutal. It's about this woman who is in this abusive relationship, and she sort of is trying to deal with that and the violence of it, but she's also so immersed in the abuse of this relationship and the all-encompassing sort of feeling that it is, that this relationship takes up in her, that she truly thinks that this is the man that she's with is like the love of her life or whatever, despite everyone around her, and the many red flags that we as readers can perceive are like, no girl, that's not it. This book kind of feels like a darker, like Otessa Moshfegh even. Definitely look up trigger warnings and content warnings for this book and all of these novellas, honestly, if you need them, because this is pretty graphic and it's really heartbreaking, but it's also written in this sort of like dry, removed tone, and like it explores that the mental illness of this woman, and also the way that she is not a sympathetic character. Like she says and does a lot of things that are morally reprehensible, but she's still ultimately a victim within the situation. It's a very provocative novella, I think, and it was obviously originally written in Icelandic. Wait, what's the language they speak in Iceland? Oh no. But it's a translated novel, so, and I think this book got like a lot of hype in Iceland when it was released, and a lot of buzz because of the fact that it is, it's provocative, like I said. So yeah. The next novella I want to recommend is Bryony and Roses by T.L. Kingfisher. This book is sort of a Beauty and the Beast retelling, but with more magical plant elements and less of a coercive relationship. There's more autonomy sort of given to both characters. The romance feels more interesting. The setting is more interesting. The family dynamics are more fleshed out. It is a really good book, I think. I mean, it's really solid for what it is. I think that a lot of the details in this book are what make it good. And yeah, I really appreciate it for what it is, and I don't really hear that many people talk about it, so Would definitely recommend. The next book I want to recommend is another Brandon Sanderson, but this was written by Brandon Sanderson and Mary Kay Robinette, and that is the original. This book is another clone story. It's set in the future, sort of like a sci-fi world where everyone's perception is sort of altered by the technology that everyone has, these implants that everyone has, but the people who choose not to participate within this technology, which is sort of ubiquitous, the way like maybe like iPhones are or smartphones are within this current world, that's sort of like how these implants that alter your perception work within this world is pretty ubiquitous. People who don't engage with that technology are seen as kind of like weird. But basically, our main character ends up being put in that position of not having an altered perception because she is a clone of herself and she's trying to solve a crime or otherwise sort of get to the bottom of something, because the government is the one that commissioned this clone to exist, because the original body that our main character is the clone of apparently murdered her husband. And because the clone of this woman is like, why the fuck would I do that? I would never have done that. That's just not something I would have done. She's trying to retrace her steps and think the way that she would have thought to try to figure out what's really going on. This book is so intelligent and it explores those themes of government and technology, surveillance and perception, identity, and the implications of cloning, the implications of a technology that can fundamentally alter so many elements of yourself and power dynamics and individuality and humanity. Like, I think it brings up a lot of really interesting questions with this really fast-paced plot that feels like almost a mystery. I think that this book was really like mind-blowing in a lot of ways, and it's totally an underrated novella, and you should definitely check it out. The next book I want to talk about is a book that I've talked about quite a lot on this channel, I feel like, and that is Yellow Jessamine by Caitlin Starling. This book is a gothic, sapphic fantasy, sort of. Basically, we're following this merchant woman who is one of the only women in this powerful cabal of people in her city, which is basically like a port city that is on the decline because all the other cities near this port city have been enfolded into the Empire, and the Empire is sort of a looming threat throughout the entirety of this novella, because the goal of this empire is obviously, like all empires, to enfold in as much land and resources and people and cities as possible. And so this port city is still holding out and like not enfolding into the empire. We're following our main character as she tries to navigate the power dynamics going on in the city right now, and also the fact that she is a plant murder girly. Basically, like, she is known as the Widow, and that's why she was able to accumulate the amount of power that she has as one of the only women at the table, like at the metaphorical and literal table of, like, you know, the powerful decision-making wealthy men of her city. And basically she got to this position by killing the men in her family. And she's always been a soft-spoken, quiet, reserved person. But because we are in her perspective and in her mind, we see how she constructs this perception of herself in order to maintain the power that she has, as well as the maneuvers that she makes, political and otherwise, to maintain it. And it's very grim and dark, and throughout the entirety of the book, she is beset by anxiety because she is constantly aware of and threatened by the possibility of being exposed as a fraud or as a murderer and being stripped of her titles and autonomy. So this book is a very interesting, like, feminist text, obviously, but it's also a really beautiful examination of grief and the magic involved in this book, and the horror and the gothicness of it is what is so compelling to me about it. It's so deeply immersive and anxiety-inducing in the best ways possible, honestly, and it's just so dark and grim and beautiful, so highly recommend. The next book I want to recommend is Desdemona and the Deep by C.S.E. Cooney. This book is a really sweet novella that has a lot of queer and trans characters who are very quirky and sweet, and lively, and there is a whole plot line involved where this heiress type girl, our main character, is the daughter of a very wealthy sort of like oil executive. This is set in sort of a fantasy world, like a Regency sort of fantasy world, I guess. And so her dad is like a wealthy oil executive, and her mother is a philanthropist, lesbian, and our main character ends up going on this multi-universe journey. Basically, like, in this world, there are layers to reality, so she goes into the deeper layers of reality with her best friend to try to seek justice for something that she thinks her father has done wrong. And it's a very sweet book, and I really think it's just very whimsical and magical, but also it like has the underlying messages and themes that are really important and I think explored in a really fun, interesting, original way. The next book I want to talk about is The Seventh Perfection by Daniel Polanski. This book is really interesting because it's written in second person, so the entire book is written in the sort of like you voice, like you go up to this, or not even that. It's kind of written in a way that the you voice is like implied. The second person perspective is implied because the only text on the page is other people speaking to us, and our dialogue, us as the reader, I'm put in the literal shoes of the main character, but I also don't know what the main character is saying. I only know what the other people are saying to her. So I can only infer what she is thinking, saying, and doing based off of how others interact with her and the dialogue that they say in response to my or the main character's dialogue. It's a very interesting format, but the whole concept is that this girl is looking for the reality of the history of the city because she's uncovering more and more narratives and secrets and overlapping things after getting, I think, like a locket in the mail from her dead mother, supposedly. It's a really interesting unfolding of events and very mind-boggling and intelligent and like layered. It's really interesting. I think that it's a solid science fiction novel that feels like a fantasy almost, because it's like fantastical in the way that it's written, but it's also very succinct and original. The next novella I want to recommend is The Monster of Elenthaven by Jennifer Geisbrecht. This book, I think, is a little bit more popular than the other ones that I've been talking about. This book is basically like a queer Frankenstein retelling, kind of. We're basically following this quiet sort of accountant in this like small seaside town. It's very gothic and dark and gloomy, and he and this monster, they get entangled in this like homoerotic relationship. It's very dark and grim, but also still charming and quirky at the same time. I don't know. It's like a fun balance of those two things, and feels like a gay little Tim Burton animation like type feeling, if that makes sense. I really enjoyed this one. The last book I want to talk about, or the last novella on this list, is one that I physically own, but I don't physically have with me, unfortunately. However, I did do a makeup look inspired by this book, and the book is The Order of the Pure Moon Reflected in Water by Zen Cho. This is a fantasy novella following this group of bandits as they go through the jungles of fantasy Southeast Asia. There's queer narratives in here. It's fun, it's fast-paced, it's light, it's funny, and I think it's really unique and wonderful. Those are all the novellas that I wanted to recommend to you today. Hopefully that was short and sweet, like all of these books are. Hopefully you learned of a few books that you haven't heard of before, or that, you are now interested in picking up. If you have read any of these novellas before, comment down below which ones and whether you enjoyed them. And if you haven't, let me know which ones interest you the most. That's all that I have for you today. Thank you so much for watching. Like, comment, subscribe, all that bullshit. And I will see you in my next video. Bye!